Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hi. Okay. So let's talk about your paper. And so let
Okay.
me share the screen and go here and here. And I think we will see that. Where did it come up here? Second. Okay. Can you see your paper there?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So let's save that again in case I make some more changes to it. And so we'll go like that. Two here. And okay. So let me remind myself what I wrote here. Okay, all right. So I guess it's a good first draft. So after reading the article and textbook written by Zen, I found. So you don't need to say I found. Don't I said avoid, because of course one of my tasks here is to help you polish your already wonderful English to make it. Well, it's not even to polish your English, just to teach you about, for example, conventions in academic writing. So typically in academic writing, we don't use first person because it's all about claims about scientific truth. So we make a truth claim, we state the truth, and then we prove that statement, right? So you don't need to see, you don't say, I think, or I found, or I believe, because that reminds the reader that the reader is reading opinions, impressions, not truth statements. So just make the claim, make your statement, and then prove it. So you might say, after reading the article and textbook written by Zen, any reader would see significant differences between Zen and Flynn, for example.
Like, okay.
Simply, Zen is trying to also when I make suggestions in terms of how to maybe rephrase something a little more clearly. I often make two suggestions because I think it's better for the student to think about what they would want to say, because if they have to think about what they want to say, how they want to say it, they're more likely to learn. So either one's okay. So simply, Zen is trying to revise the teaching of or reform the teaching of. So so either one's all right. And so I think that's what you're trying to say. Zen is trying to revise the teaching or reform the teaching of American history just as it is. And Flynn wants to keep the original way of teaching American history. So I'll let you choose one of those two that you want to, because if Zen wants to change,
Yeah.
Flynn, is happy with the traditional American exceptionalism, positive exceptionalism of the United States perspective or theoretical framework that is traditional notions of American history, that America is this unique positive experience in world civilization, and it's because of its exceptional nature, its exceptional history, and that is the framework that Zen is apparently responding to, because Zen uses a different theoretical lens, like the lens of this glasses here, right? His lens is Marxism, a Marxist lens, and Marxism emphasizes different sources of cause and motivation and push and drives that are causing and driving the development of human history, human civilization. And it emphasizes conflict over economic resources, conflict over control over the means of production is how he phrased it. And the means of production change over the years, but when Christopher Columbus landed on what is today the Americas, North America, it was what Zen called a period of primitive accumulation, that there was the means of production was focused upon stealing resources basically from poor people, including their labor by enslaving them, gold, silver, resources, and that was the period of primitive accumulation, which Marxists say explains why, since the Europeans were the first to do that, they got an economic and therefore power advantage over the rest of the world. So, but and America, and that's how Zen is approaching American history. That American history was founded by people who were seeking to get rich and by exploiting whomever they could in order to get rich. And to the extent to which America is a country that respects human rights, it respects human rights because people fought to make the political system and the political authorities change their policies. And they became those people fighting as dissidents, as opponents to the conservative, prosperous, powerful few at the top of the system, they were weak, and then they became potentially stronger as the world changed as a consequence of capitalism. All right, there was more and more workers as more and more industrialization occurred. More and more people moved to the cities and got jobs in factories, and it was easier to organize those people than it is to organize poor peasants spread out over thousands of kilometers with little patches of land. It's easier to organize people if they all come together, thousands of people every day to work in a factory. And so, yeah, I mean, so economic forces are important for changing the world, but it doesn't just change on its own. People have to decide that now is the time to try to change it, fight to change it, often lose or make not hardly any progress, but they keep fighting and making the change happen. So to create what we call human rights, and human rights change. I mean, that's the point that I think Zinn would make, that let's take, for example, women's rights. 200 years ago, in 1821, most Americans, including women, would have thought, what do you mean women should have the right to vote? Women shouldn't have the right to vote. Women are, they're weak. Their minds are inferior. They're dependent on men. So if you give women the right to vote, they're just going to vote for the way their husbands tell them to vote, because women are like children. I said, would you give children the right to vote? No. Well, you can't give women the right to vote. It would have been obvious to most, not all, to most Americans in 1821. Here we are in 2021, 200 years later, and everybody just assumes, of course, women should have the right to vote. They don't. What do you mean women shouldn't have a right to vote? They still can't vote in Saudi Arabia, by the way. There's places where they still can't vote, but of course, and so how did that change happen in people's predominant thinking? And it happened not just because the world economically changed, so women started working in factories. Yes, that's a very important part of it. Technology developed so that you can work in a factory and not need to rely upon your muscles, to provide the power, because now we have power, electricity and power tools, and women can do factory work too, and there's more and more of those. And that's important. So people are saying, well, look, all these women working in factories, of course they should be allowed to vote, because they're depending upon the economic policies of the government to determine their own welfare as workers in this economy, right? So of course, they can. So yeah, there's economic forces creating more and more potential, but for that potential for change to happen, somebody has got to express it, articulate it, fight for fight for the change. And they're going to face resistance, and sometimes that resistance is going to be violent and deadly, like the people that wanted to defend slavery in the United States. I mean, they clearly felt very strongly about that. I mean, we think it's obvious. Of course, you can't own slaves. Of course, it's ridiculous. Well, clearly, a lot of people felt a different way 150 years ago in America, because they're willing to fight and die by the thousands to defend that system. So, and the point is that process, I think this is what Zinn wants to highlight, that process never stops. So what we take for granted today, what's a controversial topic? LGBTQ rights. Should LGBTQ people have the same equality before the law? In terms of, if you want to get married, can two men get married in Korea? No. Should they be allowed to get married in Korea? Well, let's argue about it. Should two men be allowed to get married and adopt children and raise a child as two married men? I mean, some people think, older people say, no, you can't do that. But other people say, well, sure, yes, of course they should have that right. Or, and I think it's also important to know how, and I mentioned this when talking with the female students in particular, about how rights can be taken away. So, for example, I mean, we're men, you and I. We just take it for granted that people should have control over their bodies. We don't get pregnant, but half of the population can get pregnant. Should those women be able to have control over their bodies by getting access to abortion if they get pregnant? And if you're a woman feminist, you might say, of course, they should have control over their body. And, it's not just a woman doesn't get pregnant by herself. She gets pregnant because a man was responsible for it as well. But of course, the men, and they go even deeper. They say, and this is the stereotype that, in America, abortion became legal in 1973 with the Supreme Court ruling in Roe versus Wade in 1973 that abortion cannot be made illegal. It can be restricted and limited, but it can't be made illegal. In other words, it's a constitutional right. And ever since, there's been a reaction against that to reverse that decision. And it might well happen in the next couple of months now, because there's new court justices put on the Supreme Court by Trump when he was president that are very right-wing, and they were selected because they were anti-abortion access. That they were opposed to this notion that women have a constitutional right to access to abortion. And the argument, of course, is by those people is that, well, because that unborn baby is a human being. You can't murder people. You can't murder babies. And that's abortion is murder. And the fact that women get pregnant, well, that's the way God created the world. So deal with it. That's just the way it is. You can't murder people. You can't murder babies. That's how they talk. So the right was given to women, and it might well, and 48 years later, 49, 50 years later, it might be taken back unless people fight and struggle. And this is not the first time that happened. Like I'm reading now in the Zinn book about Reconstruction, how, okay, this horrible war was fought that was shocked everybody how violent it was, including much of the world. It lasted for 4 or 5 years, maybe 700,000, 800,000 people died in that war. And then the North won, and they said, okay, now we're going to abolish slavery, and we're going to integrate Black people, and Black people are going to be free, and they're going to be integrated, and we're going to be citizens. And during the period of Reconstruction in the United States, it's called Reconstruction, that lasted from 1865 to 1877, you saw there were Black governors elected as governors of states. Black people were elected senators of southern states, governors of southern states. And then because of political deals made between the North and the South, politicians in 1877, the enforcement of those rights by the US military, by the North on the South, was taken away. The North took out the US Army out of the South, where they had been there since the end of the war, enforcing these rights. And all of those real constitutional rights that Black people had were taken away. Not officially, because they still had those rights on paper. But by the start of World War I, Black people basically in the South could not vote. Not to mention get elected. They couldn't. There were all sorts of abuses that they underwent. And so why did that happen? Because people stopped fighting, or they gave up, or they didn't have enough support, or the government didn't support them. And so that's a point that Zinn wants to highlight, that somehow people just naturally think that American history is a history of automatic progress. And it's not a history of automatic progress. People had to fight and strive and sacrifice, sometimes pay with their lives, for what we consider to be obvious truths, that women should have the right to vote, that there are that children have to go to school. I mean, 200 years ago, there wasn't that belief that children had to go to school. Like in Chosun, Korea, 100 years ago, you got a woman married a man. They were peasants working on the village and growing food, and the children were born, and the children got to work on the farm, right? As soon as they could start to walk, they started working. And that's the way most of the world was. So this notion is somehow children shouldn't have to work, that children should instead go to school. We just take that for granted. But that wasn't the way the world was originally. People didn't assume that to be true. And that happened because of the labor movement. The labor movement created these, through their demands and their organization, that we covered in class, this notion that children should have the right to go to school, which means you should pay your workers enough so that you don't need the children to work in order to support the family. because the workers make enough money that they can support themselves. And I think that is what Zinn is trying to highlight in the book. It's a book about social movements, basically, and also written about for social movements for people, students that until they encounter the Zinn book, they're always taught with the Flynn orientation, the positive American exceptional theoretical lens, right? That America is great and powerful and strong and admired by all over the world. America is admired by many Koreans, many Japanese, many Europeans, all over the world, because of its freedoms and its model, its economic system and its political system. But I think Flynn's anger with Zinn is that you don't understand any of that from reading Zinn. Zinn doesn't focus on the great achievements of America. He doesn't focus on why the world loves America. I mean, America is positively exceptional, and that's why this course right now that you are having with me is in English and not in Japanese, not in Chinese, not in Russian, in English, because the American model is exceptionally positive compared to the old Japanese model or the old the current Chinese model, or even the current, not to mention the old communist Soviet model or the current Russian model. That there's something, and you don't understand that from reading Zinn, according to Flynn. And instead, when you read Zinn, if that's the only thing you study in American history, you might feel ashamed of America, ashamed of the United States, and particularly if you're a white person, a white European American. You might feel embarrassed by what your country represents, about how it's founded upon racist imperialism and colonialism and enslavement. Now, of course, Zinn would point out that this book is only used typically in advanced classes in high school and in college. It's not used, in first grade, in 6-year-old children in the United States. Students and everybody learns about the positive, exceptional nature of America from the time that they're born. But if they're truly going to understand how America became the country that it is today, they need to understand all of those people that dissented and fought and resisted the status quo. And when they did that, they were often hated, despised, attacked, sometimes killed. And that process continues. So, okay, so and if you instead, I think that's another point, because it seems like, for example, when you read the Zinn book is written not only, but it's written for white students. Like, if I'm a Black student, I already know probably about Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, but if I'm a white student, I'm not going to really know about these things unless I read Zinn. And if you don't know about this history, like, for example, why is it, if you think America is just this wonderful, exceptionally positive model, then why, why are the poverty rate among Black people is more than double the poverty rate among white people? Why are the prison rate for people that are Black and Hispanic double what it is for the prison rate for white people as a percent of the population? Why is the life expectancy of Black people in certain cities as low as it is in some places in Africa? Why is it that Indian Americans live in the poorest parts of the United States. They have life expectancy that's equivalent for men, for example, to what you find in Somalia. Why is it that 70 to 80% of Indian adults have drug or alcohol abuse problems? And if you don't know anything about what Zinn is telling you, you say, well, it's because those people failed. They're failures. It's their fault. They're bad. Or their parents were bad. Maybe they'll say, but it's their fault. It's not America's. It's not the history of the system that created America. No. America's great. Look how powerful and wonderful it is. And Zinn will make that point later in the book, in the second half of the book. That if people are poor, it's because they don't try hard enough. They don't work hard enough. And that's a theme that emerges through the 19th century and it emerges in the 20th century. Like there's a well-known book, The Power of Positive Thinking. It was a popular book that came out in the 1940s. And the person who wrote it was a Moksha, a minister. And I think it was Daniel Carnegie. Anyway, this Moksha was Donald Trump's family's minister in New York City. And Donald Trump represents all of that. What made America great are traditional American values, not leftist socialism, not radical gender identity politics and critical race theory. Traditional American values made America great. And if you if you are unsuccessful, it's your fault. You're not working hard enough, even though, of course, Donald Trump inherited his wealth from his father, right? But he doesn't want to talk about that. He lies about that. He's a demagogue. He's a liar. He claims his father only gave him like $1 million loan, and that's bullshit. The New York Times did an investigation a few years ago, and they found he inherited almost $500 million from his father. So if I inherited $500 million, I might be, and not just the money, but also the networks and the connections that his family has through his father with bankers, and because so much of business and economics is about connections and relationships, right? And then Donald Trump, is not even that successful a businessman. He's gone bankrupt more than once, right? But because he's in those networks of people, he has those assets that he can somehow restructure things and continue on, right? But it's just really, I guess Zinn would, because Zinn's been dead for 11 years, right? So if Zinn were alive today and he saw the rise of Donald Trump, he would say, you want proof that this American system's screwed up? What more proof do you need? The election of Donald Trump and his attempt to carry out a coup early this year in 2021. And the fact that this guy is still dominating the Republican Party, one of the two parties in the United States, and he's going to run again for president. That's the evidence of how screwed up the system is. Because Donald Trump is all about white supremacy. He's all about conservative traditional values. At least he talks that way. And he lies because he says one thing and does something else. He abuses women. And he talks like he's religious. And I mean, what would Howard Zinn say if he was still alive? And he would say, I told you this was going to happen. I warned you. I warned you that this sociopath became president of the United States, controlled the US military, the vast nuclear missile system. China was worried. I mean, the US commanding general, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was it Miley? David Miley? Miley's his last name. He got on the phone twice and talked with the Chinese military leadership to calm them down because they were afraid that Donald Trump was going to attack them because as a way by which to try to carry out a military coup in the United States by creating a national emergency. He didn't ask for Trump's permission. He just got on the phone and called the Chinese general. And I just like highlighting this because I keep saying, because American students are brainwashed to believe that America is great. It's exceptional. It's wonderful. It's a great democracy. It's the beacon. And it elected Trump. Now, somebody who defends the American system say, well, you know, Trump got elected and then he got removed. The system worked. Yay! It's still a good system. Well, it's got its good parts, but it's got its bad parts too. And, you know, I mean, one of the reasons why I like having these meetings and talking with people, whether it be on Zoom or face-to-face, is because I have to think through these things that are going on in my own head. And, you know, I'm going to say Donald, yeah, what Zinn would say. Trump. And he's not going away. And even if he doesn't run or loses, there are people that are going to exploit, that are already trying to replace Trump and talk in American conservative populist terms. And America is a dangerous place, because if somebody who's not a clown becomes president and, like, for example, recognizes Taiwan, if the Republicans win the presidency in 2024, they'll probably formally recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. And that means we here in Korea are going to pay the price, because the Chinese are going to respond. They're going to back up North Korea, and it's going to affect us much more immediately than it will the Americans. But, you know, that's what Zinn would say. I rest my case. Trump. So do you have any questions? Yeah, put the page number down so I can verify.
Okay.
Okay, the specific page number, okay? Okay, that's it for today then. I got another meeting at the top of the hour. So I don't think I made, or maybe I made some slight changes, but I'll send you this again. And I'll see you next week, okay?
Okay.
Bye.